Okay, y'all know what a big sci-fi nerdy geek person I am. So imagine my delight when I met the lady who actually wrote a biography of Steve Einat. Now, I know most of you probably don't know who he is, so all I can tell you is go buy the book, okay? And if you're a Trekkie, you know exactly who he is. So that's my guest today, and I can't wait to talk to her. So welcome to the Rebel Tribe podcast, where empowerment meets attitude and sass meets savvy. As evidenced by my guest today, we're not just another podcast. We are your virtual tribe of fierce females, and we are ready to conquer the world. So join us as we smash through stereotypes and break barriers and redefine what it means to be a woman in today's world. My guest today is none other than Linda Alexander. Those of you that are nerds and geeks and bookies like me, bookies probably not the right word, bibliophiles like me. know
What are
exactly.
you booking, Melody Ann?
Maybe I'll be a bookie someday. Who knows? Y'all know exactly who she is, so I can't wait for y'all to meet her. Linda, say hello.
Hello.
Let's get right into this. You have been writing professionally forever, it seems like, since like the early 1990s.
At
So,
least, yeah,
yeah,
late 80s, early 90s.
what got you
That's
started?
forever for me.
What started you writing? How did you transition into a career as an author and a journalist? Because a lot of us, I mean, I write, I've got a couple books, other people have probably got a couple of books, but none of us consider ourselves to have careers as authors. We're other things and we have a couple books out there besides. You are an author as your career. How did that happen?
Well, like I said, I have written forever, and it's just something I've really, I mean, when I was a little kid, I wanted to dance, but that was never anything serious. But I've always written. When I was sad, I wrote. When I was happy, I wrote. I used to go in my closet, lock myself in the closet, and I wrote. And it was just my outlet. And my dream was always to be a published professional author, and I never gave myself an option, a second option, really. And I was determined. So I went from small outlets being newspapers and submitting to newspapers, local newspapers, and to magazines. And someone at a newspaper said, well, maybe you ought to go to the magazine. And someone at a magazine says, well, maybe you ought to go to a national magazine. And I did, and they took me. And I figured that if a national magazine will read me, well, then maybe a publisher will read me. And the rest is history.
Wow, so you've had all of that, newspapers, magazines. How did you navigate such a diverse writing career?
I mean, it just seemed logical to me. What I had a very small newspaper when I lived in Maryland, which is basically where I grew up, and a very small newspaper gave me my own column, and he gave me the freedom to write about. When I first started, I tried, let's put it that way. I tried to write books. I tried to write romance novels. That is my secret, my dirty passion, if you will, is I love to read romance novels. And I literally learned to write in the romance novel industry because people who don't understand romance novels do not understand that that is a very, very regimented industry. And they teach you how to write, and they teach you how to write very, very well because there are rules in that industry. And I had the most glowing rejections from the romance novel industry. I could wallpaper a bathroom in rejection letters. That's how many I have of them, and I have them all still. And one very, very kind editor sent me I believe, two-page rejection letter telling me how wonderful my novel was, but that it did not fit the rules and regulations of the romance novel industry, and that I probably should not be writing romance novels. I should probably be writing nonfiction. and but I should still be writing about people. And so I ended up writing for this very, very small newspaper. And this man, the editor, gave me freedom to write whatever I wanted. So local local bands would be there. I'd start writing about local bands because I love the entertainment industry. And then every now and then, a well-known figure would come into town and would play somewhere locally. And I just had the chutzpah, I guess, to say, can I get an interview? And I'd get an interview. And then my little newspaper, my little column, I could print it in there because he let me print anything. So, from there, they said, well, and then occasionally I would get something for the soap opera industry, which I also watch soaps, certain soaps. And from that, they said, well, if you can sell it here, contact the soap opera magazines. Maybe they'll take it. And I contacted Soap Opera Digest, which at that time was a big magazine, and they took it. So, it was just one of those things that rolled. It happened.
I have to admit now, you saw my post on my comment on one of your posts the other day where I told you I was like green with envy because you interviewed one of my idols, Dick Van Dyke. And you've also interviewed some other like very iconic figures, Ed Asner, Tiny Tim. Do you have a favorite memory or what's your favorite
I have
interviews?
so many of them. I do. Dick Van Dyke was a very kind man, a very, very nice gentleman. Anything you can hear about him is true. My favorite thought about him is that, and I've interviewed virtually everybody from the Diagnosis Murder set, from actors down to set people and cast, because I'm writing a book on the show. And not a single soul has said a negative thing about the man. So, there's God, there's Jesus Christ, and there's Dick Van Dyke. That's kind of the way it goes. Um, and so you can't find anything negative about him. I mean, he was an alcoholic, but so what? He's overcome that. He's a good man despite anything else. We all have our issues. But insofar as memories are concerned, I would have to say one of the real big standouts, if I were to pick out a memory, it was interviewing Jim Varney. And I'm sure most people know who Jim Varney was from the You Know What I Mean, Vern movies were. And I interviewed him on set of one of his um, Vern movies. And I walked in, and the first thing I saw was a midget in boots. And excuse me, that's probably a politically incorrect term, a small person. And this individual was the one who took me to see him. And he was not a traditionally handsome man, but he was not in any way, shape, or form what most people saw of him. He had the brightest, most beautiful blue eyes any human being I've ever seen had. And he was just the most intelligent, highly educated human being I think I've ever spoken to. And the movies that he starred in, no one would ever have considered him to be intelligent. But he was just a brilliant individual and so kind-hearted and wonderful. I've just had, you know, I literally could write a book about the people I've interviewed and Michael Cole, who I know you said was one of my teen idols from the Mod Squad. And, Be Still My Heart. He was just gorgeous and on television and mysterious. And, I can't, countless young girls drooled over him on television. And to be able to interview him, I met him at a I met him at a 7-Eleven. He put me in his gold It was some sort of wonderful, expensive car. I can't even remember what it was. The door slipped out of my hand and slammed, and he says, "Don't do that." I certainly didn't do it on purpose, but it was his car. He drove me up the mountain to his house, in which we were the only two occupants in his house. And I interviewed him, and he was very intelligent, very deep. And uh, by the time we finished, he wanted to cook me dinner. He wanted to cook me spaghetti and wine, and I chose to turn him down because I was married. It just would not have been a wise move. Let's just put it that way. And so he put me in his car and took me down the hill back to my car, and I said goodbye, Michael. But years later, I became part of his fan group here on Facebook. And darn if he did not tell me in an exchange that he remembered me and he remembered me being at his house, which of all the people he's ever spoken to, that amazed me. So, I just, that was definitely worth it. We lost him just a few months ago. He passed away. So,
I know, I was sad. I admit I had a Michael Cole poster in my bedroom as I'm, sorry, I was smitten.
yeah, you and how many other thousands of young girls? You and me both.
So I know you've interviewed Tiny Tim as well, and he called you a listener,
Oh
and
yeah, he was a trip.
I can only imagine. And then there's been others that have actually compared you to Barbara Walters. And after reading
Uh,
a couple
a,
of
a
books,
publisher did, yeah.
well, after reading a couple of your books, I mean, I can understand because you seem to get an awful lot of really good information out of these people. So, what's your secret? How do you get such candid and personal responses from your subjects?
You have to treat them as human beings, as individuals, not as television or film stars, as icons. You have to just be very real with them. One gentleman I remember was very, very, he was a difficult man. His name was Michael Zaslow. He was a star on Guiding Light, and I couldn't get anything out of him. And I didn't know how I was going to salvage the interview. And I noticed that he was moving his hands a lot, and he had the most glorious long fingers and hands. And I just suddenly, it was the only thing I could think of, and I made comment on how nice his hands were. And for some reason, that just set him off in a good way. And suddenly it was like I had opened a portal with him. And he identified with that. I picked up something on him, and he started talking to me, and we suddenly had something upon which we could talk one on one. And he really gave me an excellent, excellent interview after that. But you have to get to a spot with them that they know that you are genuine, you're honest, you're not trying to, you're not going to take whatever they say and just, you're not out there to get dirt from them, because a lot of people are just going to write stuff about them that's going to be sensationalist. I don't write sensationalist information. I want to find out about the human being behind the glitter, so to speak. And that's what they have to understand. And I think once they understand that about me, they're willing to talk to me.
Other than Michael Cole, okay, because we both know, okay, if you're our age and you watch the Mod Squad, then you know. And if you're younger and you've never seen it, surely it's playing in somewhere. Okay, surely it's
Yeah.
playing somewhere. You need to go watch it,
Go on YouTube. You'll find it on YouTube.
and then you'll be smitten as well. Okay. But other than Michael Cole, was there ever, I mean, who else? Who else left you absolutely starstruck when you that you got to interview? Because I know how I would
Uh,
I'd be like tongue-tied. So
well, I tend to go for what I call the underdog. And those people aren't always people that everybody would immediately know. Like I said, I interviewed a lot of soap stars, but only from basically two soaps, and that was Guiding Light and now I'm drawing a blank, As the World Turns, um, whatever. But one of them, there was a gentleman by the name of David Forsyth. And David played, and look him up because you'll be smitten. He's still to this day absolutely gorgeous, and I know he's well into his 70s, late 70s. But when I interviewed him, his storyline was that of a Vietnam veteran and with PTSD, and he was involved in some really tough scenes of that ilk. And what got me about that was that David Forsyth was a Vietnam veteran with PTSD. And my my thought was that how in the world can someone who who has gone through this and who still has flashbacks and who still has PTSD go into work every day and relive this all the time? I didn't understand that. And so when we sat down and interviewed, I asked him about that. And he gave me the absolute most fascinating interview, one of the most fascinating interviews I've ever had. And he explained that it was a catharsis for him to be able to do that because it helped him get through his own memories and what he had to live through and what he continued to live through. And that interview, among all the other, most of the interviews that I've ever done, are on my Author's Den website. So, that's the sort of thing that I like to find out and figure out because it explains why people are, what they do, what makes them tick. And besides the fact it's not hard to sit across the table from someone who looks like David Forsyth and listen to him talk.
well, now I kind of know your books because, like I said, I know you from the book about Steve Einat. I'm barely patiently, and I say barely patiently, waiting for the book about diagnosis murder because it was one of my
So
favorites.
am I.
So I know that you've written several biographies, but I was kind of surprised as we got ready for this interview to find out that you also wrote some suspense novels. How do you go from writing suspense novels to biographies? How do you balance that?
Well, like I said, I wrote those before I wrote, well, I won't say I wrote, I did write one nonfiction book before I wrote the novels. That was basically international political biography. That was the very first book I ever wrote, and then I wrote the two novels. Um, and that was during a time when I was having real difficulty finding publishers, reputable publishers. The industry was going through a lot of changes, and I did get those books published through very small presses. Um, it wasn't a good time per se, um, but they got out there. And I'm very proud of them. The books got excellent reviews. One was reviewed in Romantic Times with a very decent review. They're both dark romantic suspense. Once I get the Diagnosis Murder book out, I do want to get both of them, one in particular, back out, and I hope to do so. I'll probably do it myself. Trying to get a publisher again these days, it's just so much work and it's so iffy anymore. That learning to do it yourself is probably less work than finding a publisher anymore. So, I just very well may do it that way. Because like I said, I'm very proud of these books and I hate to see them just languishing on the shelves. If I don't know, it's not that difficult to bounce back and forth between fiction and nonfiction because if you can write, you can write, and they're all about people. And I've taught a course in the past called Getting into Character, how to develop your people. And that's a course that I literally developed myself because my philosophy is that when you write fiction, the characters you're not creating these characters per se. They are there, because a lot of writers will say, "Oh, I'm stumped. I have writer's block. I don't know where to go anymore with my characters. I can't get them to do what I want them to do." Well, that's because it's their lives. You're telling them what to do. Wouldn't you get ticked off if someone came up to you and say, "You're supposed to do this now"? Well, no, it's my life. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. You're not supposed to tell me what I'm going to do. So basically, the course helps you just sit back and start writing and let your characters tell you what they're going to do because it's their life. For crying out loud, let them tell you what they're going to do. So, as that relates to nonfiction, I write nonfiction and I find out the people's story because they've already got their story out there via people that have known them and media and so forth. And as that correlates to fiction, well, whether it's in the consciousness of everybody that's come around to sound sort of foo-foo, I don't know. But to me, it's not all that different. I'm a little weird maybe, but that's just how I look at it.
Do you have a favorite book of all the ones you've written?
I don't want to tick off anybody that any relatives that I've written about. But I'll put it this way. I don't think Steve Einat's story is finished. It is not completed. Um, because I, honest to gosh, am not convinced that Steve Einat, who actually, to go back to what you said at the very beginning, Steve Einat played Garth Vizar in one episode of Star Trek, and he has forever become famous for that particular episode. And Trekkies the world over know him for being the Lord Garth of Izar. So, if you see him in that get up that he did, they automatically know who that is. And so he supposedly died of a sudden heart attack in Cannes, France, at the age of 37, almost 38 years old. I am not convinced. His family is not convinced. A number of other people are not convinced that it was a heart attack, or if it was a heart attack, that it was a simple heart attack that just came upon him. Steve had such an unusual life. He had so many different nationalities in him and so many opportunities to transfer between different nationalities. And there was one particular person, at least in his life, that had been deceiving him for decades, that could very well have been doing other things to him behind his back, that some people believe he may have been murdered. And I have found out during the time I was researching the book and since the book has been published, I left the book open to say, here are things that happened to him. You tell me, what do you think happened to the man? Because I'm not convinced that he died so simply. And I'm not finished with this yet. But since he's died, I found out even more that makes me believe even more that this death was very, very suspicious. So I believe there's another book to be done on Steve, which makes me not able to give up on the man. And frankly, he won't leave me alone. He's still nagging me almost every single day. So me and Steve are still on a journey together.
How do you decide who to write about or pick a subject to write about, and then how do you do all the researching and the writing? And because I have never heard that about the man, to be honest, until your book, and I was kind of surprised. So how do you first of all, how do you pick a subject, and then how do you research and write and find all this stuff that most of us don't know?
Well, I love it because I get that question. If I, the old saying, if I had a nickel for every time I've been asked that, I'd be a very wealthy woman. And literally, I do get asked that all the time. And the answer that I give probably brands me, it would get me a very well padded room in an exclusive loony bin. Um, because I do not select the people that I write about. I believe that they select me, which is the reason, for better or for worse, that I have called myself the spirit biographer. Because however you want to say it, there's the old saying that when we pass away, our bodies go, but we are made up of energy. I'm a very spiritual person. I'll preface it with that. I do have a very strong Christian belief system, but beyond that, that may or may not seem to war with the concept that I still believe that we are all based in energy and that when the body goes away, the spirit does not go away. It's all still here somehow, some way, somewhere. That means there are a heck of a lot of spirits out there just bouncing around with each other. It must be a really, really crowded universe. But one way or the other. And, there are a lot of stories involved in that, if that be the case. And you can't deny that energy still exists. It's in everything. And when when I finish a book and I'm going to start another one, I'll look at people and I'll try to review people and they'll say, no, that one doesn't work. That one doesn't work. I'm not interested. I can't even begin to think of that person. Well, insofar as Steve was concerned, my husband and I were in bed one night just watching television, flipping channels, and The Outer Limits came on. And there was a two-parter, Outer Limits, in which Steve starred. And I just glanced up at the television set and I looked at it. And here he is with his head was completely bandaged and he's in a wheelchair. And I looked up at it and I said, I know that man. Now, there's no way in the world I could have known Steve Inat because I was about 6 years old when that show came out. No way. And yet I looked at that, and from that second on, he wouldn't let me go. That was the man I was going to write about. There was no other person. And the next day I started researching him, and that was my next book. And every single book I've written about, I've had a situation like that, which has occurred. That the next person, something happened, and that was the person I was writing about. Except for Robert Taylor. And the reason I wrote about Robert Taylor is because he reminded me of my father. Um, but beyond that, every single one has been somebody, they just literally grabbed me and said, okay, come along, you're writing about me.
Okay. I don't think that's odd at all, so I get it completely. But that,
Okay, you're odd too.
huh? Yeah, I know.
You're odd too.
We know. Okay. And I own it, dang it. Okay.
I do too, what the heck?
So that just, but that now that got, it got me, it's very curious. So I know your next book is about diagnosis murder, and it's not really a biography per se, I guess, unless you're writing a biography of the TV show, maybe. But it's not, I mean, it's one of my shows that I watched all the time, but it's not one you hear talked about a lot. It's, I mean, I guess it did okay back in its day, but it's not, it hasn't reached that level of cult fandom that so many, so why diagnosis murder? What inspired you to pick that one?
Well, it really does have its own cult fandom. You'd be surprised. But it's quiet. It has a quiet cult fandom, for lack of a better way to put it. But in a way, it bit me in the same fashion. I was watching. I had the TV on when I was getting ready one day, and I was ready to write another book, and I looked up, and there it was, and it said, "Okay, you're writing about me." But I had never written a show book before, and I was hesitant to do it because it has its own set of rules and regulations, and it's a bunch of different challenges than writing a biography because I knew exactly what to do writing a biography. I really wasn't sure what to do about writing a show book. But I wrote to my publisher and I said, "What do you think about this?" And he wrote back almost immediately, said, "I think it's an excellent idea. And as a matter of fact, I personally know Lee Goldberg, who was who is one of the executive producers. And I'll put you in touch with Lee, and Lee can give you a whole bunch of information." Well, that was the understatement of the year. I thought it was Christmas once once Lee Goldberg got in touch with me, because Lee just started feeding me information, one right after the other. And after that, all systems were go. I was getting stuff from every angle. So it was like it was meant to be. It was just like another one of those, okay, this is your next book. We're going to go with it. And it was another underdog situation because Diagnosis Murder was one of those TV shows that was, and people are going to be, I think, surprised at this, but it was another show that was almost every year on the cusp of being canceled. Every time it went, it was ready for its next season, it was ready to be canceled because it almost never really made any money. It was never a darling of the people that were trying. They were trying to cancel it almost every season. They did every darn thing they could to try and get it off the air because Dick Van Dyke was an older man. Its fans were older people, and the people who were trying to keep shows on the air were the yuppies, who wanted um, advertisers who had young products and younger people watching television shows. So Dick Van Dyke and Diagnosis Murder did not fit the bill. But for whatever reason, this show would not die. Every year it came back, no matter what they threw at it.
Don't count me
So
out.
it, it just kept on, it was like the Energizer Bunny. It just kept on keeping on.
I wasn't that old when it was out there, and I loved that show. Hey, I,
Well, I wasn't either. And I didn't really watch it when it was out there, but I want, now watching it now, I see this, it was a smart show.
it,
It really was a smart television show.
it was. I loved it. Some people just don't know good TV when they see it.
But you can tell it now because it has withstood the test of time. And, it had good acting and it fit the bill and it's nostalgia before its time because it was fitting a niche back then for people who were quote unquote older in general, trying to find something because all they were trying to do was to fit a younger market, and they weren't trying to fit this market for 40 something, 50 something year old people who wanted something to watch that made them comfortable. And Diagnosis Murder, She Wrote, shows like that fit it, but it wasn't the fad thing to do back then. But and now it's got a resurgence going on. You can almost find it anywhere these days in some streaming market.
Just for the record, I love Murder She Wrote too.
Well, a lot of people do. We're smart people.
You've had such a rich career. I mean, newspaper, magazines, author, novelist, whatever. What keeps you inspired and motivated?
I'm I'm nosy. I just like to know what makes people tick. I'm always curious. I do genealogy too. I like to dig into what goes on in the minds of the human brain and see what, now and in the past. And I'm not all that interested in the future brain, but there are enough people doing that anyway. But I'm interested in what what we think and what makes us do what we do.
Like I said, I there most of the people that I know that are authors are authors as an add-on to their business that they're already doing. Like, like I said, I've got a book out there, I've got another one coming. I have a lot of friends who have other that have businesses and they've written books around that, but none of us would say we're authors as our career. For those people out there, and I'm thinking of one in particular that I'm actually going to do a podcast with because she's writing her first novel and she's actually quit her job and everything and is doing whatever she can because this is her calling. She's supposed to be an author. She feels it in her heart. And I want her to share her story. What's one piece of advice that you wish that you had been given at the start of your career that you would like to pass on to those people out there, like my young lady friend here, that can help them, all those people that want to be authors as a career?
I would say just write it. So many people are so afraid to just sit down and write it. They're afraid that they're gonna, you know, that they have to keep editing it, that they're not going to do it well, that they're worried about promoting it before they're even written it. They're worried about all the what ifs. And, even if you don't know where to start or if it's going to flow properly or whatever. I mean, I'm a big proponent of just I don't even know if it's right to call it auto write, but just to sit down and write. Um, Sometimes you don't even need an idea. I mean, it's nice to start with an idea, but um, because you would be amazed at what will come out of your brain if you have quiet time in front of your computer or your pen and your paper, however you choose to start it, and you simply start writing because your brain is functioning that way. And if you're going to start writing it, it's going to come out. Whatever it is, it's going to come out. And just keep it going. As long as it's going to flow, just keep it going. And don't stop until the flow stops. And then sooner or later, and then if you've got to stop, put it down, come back the next time and either start a new page, which probably is a good idea, and do it all over again. Sooner or later, you're amazed at how your unconscious will put it all together or figure out what you need to figure out because you can edit later, you can organize later, you can do all that later. But and you certainly can promote later. That's far into your future. But if you don't start, you're never going to finish. I had so many people say, I would write a book if only I had the time. Well, as far as I'm concerned, that's an insult. because if you don't think you have the time, then you shouldn't even be bothering. You know, don't even sit down and try it because then you're not worthy of writing as far as I'm concerned.
With all of the talk about your wonderful, exceptional interview skills, I have to ask, if you could interview any person, anyone at all, from all of history, who would it be and why?
Well, um, I I don't I don't know. I think if I really, a lot of people will say God or Jesus or something like that. And I personally believe sooner or later I will have that opportunity. So I'll leave that on the table. Um, I'd say the people I've written about. I'd love to be able to sit face to face and literally interview them.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
right, because most of them, except for Dick Van Dyke, most of them were already passed when you wrote their biographies.
right.
What?
I would love to be able to sit face to face. And it's interesting because I don't know if you know who Gary Clark is. Um, he was in a lot of Western TV shows, and you can look him up on Facebook. I know you know him if you saw his face. Um, he was a very, very good close friend of Steve Inat. And when Steve died, he and Steve had had a falling out not long before they passed away, and he was really crushed because of that. And then here Steve goes and passes away, and there was unfinished business. And he said that a counselor had told him one of the things that was he should do is to take a chair and sit a chair directly across from him and to sit down in his chair and face the chair that was across from him and just talk to the chair as if he were talking to Steve and to interview him and have the full discussion that he would have wanted to have with Steve had Steve been sitting there with him. And he said he did that, and it was the most cathartic, eye-opening thing he had ever done. And, to me, that was kind of intriguing because that's kind of like the interview you'd want to have if you could have. Um, and except, I'd want it to be able to be on tape.
That's just I never thought of that because yeah, you never have interviewed any of your subjects, so that's intriguing. Very cool.
No, no. Except one time, just, when I was writing the Alan Rocky Lane book, I guess I came as close as I'd ever come to really talking to someone. Um, Alan Lane he literally, any information on him stopped. I mean, it literally stopped. I had historians, Alan Lane historians, and believe it or not, there are such things, telling me, don't even bother. You're not going to find any more information on this man. Nothing more exists. You're barking up the wrong tree. You're wasting your time. And I was getting frustrated. And so I was sitting in front of my computer and I had my email open and I said something to the effect of, and it was just off the top of my head. And I said, Alan, if you want me to write this book, you better tell me what it is I need to do because I'm tired of this. Otherwise, I'm not writing this book. And all of a sudden, in my head came the words, if you want information on me, because it had been told to me that he had no family, there was nobody left that was going to be able to give me any personal information on Alan Lane. Nobody. But I had his death certificate. And there was a name on the death certificate as to somebody who had reported the information to the California state. Someone reports on a death certificate, that means that there's somebody that knows him. So in my head, all of a sudden it pops up and says, if you want to know who, if you want to know more about me, write to California for a copy of my death certificate. I mean, that's all that came into my head. So I wrote to California for a copy of his death certificate. I got a copy. This name was on the death certificate. I did research on that name. He had a stepmother, he had an aunt, he had uncles, he had nieces, he had nephews, he had an entire family that nobody knew about. So you tell me, who told me that? Who told me to write to California for his death certificate? Was it Alan? I have no clue.
Interesting. All right, so we've got diagnosis murder coming. I'm waiting.
So am I.
And then you talked about your two romance or your two novels that you want to get back out. But after that, anything? Do you have any clue what's next after that? Anybody any
Well, believe it or not, I tell people, I'm always telling people to write their own story because we all have a story to tell. Everybody has a story to tell. Um, and yet I've never told mine. So I very well may write a mosaic memoir. So I'm thinking about it.
that would be good. That would be awesome. I'd buy that. Linda, it has
I
been,
had a very strange childhood, so
haven't we all? Haven't, I have discovered that most people that I talk to that are what I would consider to be creatives. I mean, I've interviewed a lot of people so far already on this podcast, and some of them are very down to earth businessy types. I've had tax consultants and writer or not writers, but health professionals, and I've had all those people. But I've also had my fair share of what I call the creatives, and most of them, and I consider myself to be among that crowd. I am not techie or anything of any nature. I consider myself to be more of the creative ilk. Most of us have had very interesting interesting childhoods. So I don't know if that's what makes us the way we are, or I have no idea, but it just surprises me. It doesn't surprise me to hear you say that because, yeah, most of us have. Not sure why that is.
yeah.
But I have loved talking to you. Like I said, I love your books. I'm waiting for the next one.
Well, I literally just finished it now. I'm cleaning it up. So Lord willing, it'll go to the publisher soon.
Great. I want to share. So for those of you who are interested in her books, if she's written about so many interesting people, Steve Inett, Robert Taylor. I can't even remember all the other people that she's written about. She's got a bunch. What, you got like 9 now or 10?
Jack Kelly, Alan Rocky Lane. Yeah.
She's got a bunch of books
A
out there.
porn star.
You wrote about a porn star? How'd I miss that one?
I have no, well, it's not in print anymore, but yes, I did.
But I bet you if you were nice to her and contacted her, she'd send you a copy.
I'll send it out free to anybody who's interested at this point in time.
So
Literally.
going to put links to so you can reach out to her if you'd like to know more about her books. I'm going to put that in the program description. Um, and as always, I'm asking, the drill, like, comment, share, do all this stuff because I want to bring more people like Linda, like my little friend who's coming up to do an interview with me, the wannabe fantasy author who actually has, I think, a very intriguing concept that she's writing about. I was intrigued when she told me about it, so I can't wait till she finishes it. So if you want to see more interviews with people like that, please like, comment, share because we need to grow this podcast. And Linda, I thank you for being a guest today. And
Thank you.
we're going to say bye-bye. And I think I have all your information. So we're going to put all that in the comments and reach out to Linda and grab some of her books. They're very fascinating.